So now we got to the point where we're talking about the discussion of the Melakhot in the Bavli, and obviously we're not going to go through the whole thing because there's a lot of material. But the interesting thing is that following the lack of organization within the Mishnah, right? And in the email that I sent today, if you look at the ratio or the proportion of the material, it's just mind-boggling. Within the Mishnah, you have Shabbat and Eruvim together are close to 10,000 words. Almost 6,000 of them are dedicated to carrying, where carrying is considered in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, as a melacha, which is questionable whether you even have a source for it. And only 600 words are dedicated to the actual melachot and to say what is allowed and what is forbidden. Then when you go to the Gemara, you find that this discussion is also scattered over the Gemara, and there's no clear understanding of where the halachot come from, what is the nature of the prohibitions, and etc. And sometimes where there's a contradiction between how the rabbis of the Talmud perceive it and previous generation, they will just change the text. So let's look at a couple of sugyot here in the Bavli. I'm using Sefaria today, and I want to do those two sugyot in depth. One is on page 49. Here. So this is the discussion in Shabbat 49b. Ador yadve v'kami ba'ya lehu hadetnan avot melachot 40 haser achat keneged mi. So they were sitting and discussing the 40 minus 1 melachot keneged mi. They correspond to what? So that is not a question that starts out of nowhere. It doesn't start in a vacuum. I know that there are 39 melachot, and I ask, what do they correspond to? Because they don't have to correspond to anything. Why would I even ask the question, what do they correspond to? So they already have the answer. They know that someone brought up a concept of a certain correlation between the works of Shabbat and a number that appears elsewhere. And as we've discussed elsewhere, there were different opinions regarding what is melacha, what is not melacha. So the number becomes important, and that is part of the campaign of the Tannaitic, the later Tannaitic sages, of creating a uniform halacha, a halacha which is quantified and qualified and measured, and everything has a number, and you know how many melachot, how many types of malkot, etc., etc. So they created this number 39. Amarlu Rabbi Hanina bar Hama keneged avodot mishkan. They said they correspond to the labors in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan. Now, what does it mean keneged avodot mishkan? That it corresponds to the work of the Mishkan. There are two possibilities: either to the number of times the word avodah or melacha is mentioned in the Mishkan, or to the work itself that was performed in the Mishkan. Amalu Rabbi Yonatan veRabbi Elazar, Kach amar Rabbi Shimon beRabbi Yosef ben Lakonia. That's what I've heard. Keneged melacha melachto umelechet shebaTorah 40 haser achat. There, the word melacha appears in the Torah 39 times. It's very similar to the Bavli, but the Yerushalmi, but there are some differences. So the word work or labor appears in the Torah 40 less 1 times. Ba'erev Yosef, vayavo habayta la'asot melachto miminyanahu ola. The story about Yosef coming home to do his melacha, his work, which the rabbis understood as he wants to be with the wife of Potiphar, does it count or not? Amar le Abaye, veleitei sefer Torah velimnei. So bring the sefer Torah and we'll count it. What is the problem? What is your question? Just go through the text. Mila amar Rabba bar Hana amar Rabbi Yochanan lo zazu misham ad sheviu sefer Torah u'naum. Didn't we have a similar case of uncertainty where they're regarding the number of the verses in the Torah, or the place where the Torah reaches half the volume in words or verses? Didn't we say that they brought a Sefer Torah and they counted? Amar le ki kamesapkali mishum dichtiv hamelacha hayta dayam miminyanahu ve'akeman de'amar la'asot tzarchav nichnas או דילמה, ויבוא הביתה לעשות מלאכתו ממניין ההוא, והי והמלאכה הייתה דיים, אחי כאמר דשלים לעבידתה תקו. So Rav Yosef answers, he says, no, I know that there are 40 occurrences of the word. He says, I know that there are 40 occurrences of the word melacha, but I'm not sure whether we count the verse in Exodus, "V'hamelacha hayta dayam," that they had enough materials for the offering of the Mishkan, and then we'll have to interpret the pasuk in Bereshit as saying that he went to be with the wife of Potiphar, or it's the other way around. Vayavo habayta la'asot melachto, that the verse about Yosef is counted, and the melacha hayta dayam, achi ka'amar deshalim la'avideta, and the pasuk in Exodus says that the work has been completed. This is a very very narrow definition of the problem of Rav Yosef. He basically says, I know that there are 40 occurrences, but I'm not sure if would I count this and discount that, or so what are the criteria? How do you count the words? So it shows us already that this either it's a way out of a question that was asked and people felt uncomfortable with, but they leave it at teku. They leave it at a question that stands unsolved. Usually, teku in the Talmud is reserved for a situation with high uncertainty. That 1 second. So, like I said, teku is usually reserved for really unsolvable problems that you can't prove it by teku. For example, they say when you cannot solve a doubt because you don't know what the reality was, etc., etc. Here, it's so simple. Take the Sefer Torah, count all the words, and create clear criteria for what is counted and what is not counted. So it was easier for them to avoid this question. Now the Gemara leaves that alone and goes with the other one, which eventually becomes the pattern that the Gemara takes, which is highly difficult to square with all the Melakhot of the Mishkan. Tanya keman de'amar keneged avodot Mishkan. We have a baraita that supports the opinion that the 39 Melakhot correspond to the works of the Mishkan. The Tanya. En hayavin ela al melacha shekayotze ba'ita b'Mishkan. One is only obligated. One is only liable for melacha that had a similar labor in the Mishkan. Hem zar'u v'atem lo tizra'u. Hem katzru v'atem lo tiktzeru. They sowed in order to grow dyes for the tabernacle, and you should not sow. They reaped, and you shall not reap on Shabbat. You see that here in the translation, the words "in order to grow dyes" were added, because here this is one of the first problems that pop up when you look at the list of the Melakhot, and that is that the first 11 works that are mentioned in the Mishnah, Hazoreah v'Horesh v'Kotzer v'Me'amer v'Adash v'Borer, all these things, winnowing and threshing and sifting, etc., only apply to wheat. And since wheat was not used in the construction of the Mishkan, the Gemara must say that all these melachot refer to the preparation of the dye. But when you prepare dyes from plants, you don't have to go through all the melachot, all the types of labor that you use for grain. So that's the question: how do you correspond that with the works of the Mishkan? Then the Mishnah, they goes on to say that they lifted the board. הם העלו את הקרשים מקרקע לעגלה, ואתם לא תכניסו מרשות הרבים לרשות היחיד. הם הורידו את הקרשים מהעגלה לקרקע, ואתם לא תוציאו מרשות היחיד לרשות הרבים. הם הוציאו מהעגלה לעגלה, ואתם לא תוציאו מרשות היחיד לרשות היחיד. So they lifted the planks from the ground to the wagon. And since they did that in order to build the Mishkan, you cannot do that on Shabbat. And what is the equivalent? Bringing something from the public property into the private property. They lowered the planks, and therefore you cannot take from the private property to the public property. They took from one wagon to another, and therefore you cannot take from one private domain to another private domain, right? And Shuki raises a virtual eyebrow because according to halacha, there's no problem with moving an object from one private domain to another private domain, right? And this is like Tanaitic source. Now, there are more problems with that statement. If we really go and like analyze it in depth, there's more problems that the commentators point out. How is the wagon considered public property? Sorry, private property. And not only that the Gemara says that the Melakhot correspond to the construction of the Mishkan. This is not exactly the construction of the Mishkan. This is after the Mishkan was already built, and you're just taking it apart and you're carrying it to the next place. It's hard to say that it's the construction of the Mishkan. But not only that, the Agala, how is the wagon considered a public property? So some commentators say that it's because it's gavoa asara v'rahav arba'a. It's 10 handbreadth, 10 tefahim higher than the ground and 4 feet wide. So it's its own property. But they correctly remark that it had no mehitzot. It had no since it was only used to carry the planks. Those wagons were basically what we call flatbed. They were your classic flatbed. So if it has no mehitzot, if it has no fences or walls around them, it is not private property. So the answer is that once you start piling the planks up on the wagon, they form a private property. But you see the difficulty in saying that, because how would this, you're an engineer, right? Think about it in terms of you see the drawing in front of you, that we have to assume that they piled the planks on one side of the wagon and on all four corners, creating some kind of a space inside that would be private property, because otherwise it would not be private property. So this is very, very if we try to interpret it the way the later Tanaitic layers understand the Hotza'ah, it doesn't work. There's another problem, just to show how problematic this text is. Later on, we'll see in the Gemara that the Gemara understands that Hotza'ah is a melacha, and that is really what appears in the list in chapter 7, that the 39th melacha, hamotzi mereshut lereshut. That is in chapter 7, Mishnah Bet. The Mishnah doesn't say hamotzi v'hamachnis, but hamotzi mereshut lereshut. And the Gemara understood hamotzi mereshut lereshut as taking out from the private domain to the public domain. That's called hotza'ah. Doing it in the reversed order is called hachnasa. And that was not so simple to the Gemara that it is a melacha. And I brought up a possibility in today's email. Why would that be? Why did they see Otzai and Achnasai as separate actions? Because most of the melachot are understood as a certain interruption of the natural order of things. So all objects have a place. So in all movable objects eventually end up in private places. There are no movable objects in the public property, right? Unless they are trash, or they belong to the municipality and are bound to be stolen, right? That's why trash cans and benches and in some cities, everything that could be that is not screwed to the ground will be taken away. So you don't have objects, movable objects, lying around in the public property. Where is their natural place? In the private domain. So when you take something from the private domain and you take it out into the public domain, you have you have created this kind of interruption in the natural order of things, and that can be understood as melacha. But when you bring it out from the public domain into the private domain, you just put it in its right place. So it is not perceived as a melacha in the same manner. But in this particular baraita, we don't see that. We see that the first melacha mentioned is hachnasa, bringing from Reshut HaRabim to Reshut HaYahid. If it would follow the hierarchy of the Gemara as the Gemara understands it, it would be the other way around. So that's the other problem. So, like I said, if we count them all, it's not part of the construction. There's no private domain on the wagon, and the way the commentators suggest that it is very, very strange. The order is incorrect because they had to start with Otzah and then Achnasa. Then if you go back, you realize that if the Tana had the list in front of him, he would have used a different order, because when you look at the Mishnah, the order of the Melakhot, Avot Melakhot 40 Haser Echad, Hazorea v'Horesh v'Kotzer. Hazorea is number 1, HaKotzer is number 3, Motzi is number 39. So the Tana should have said, at least bring the 3 first in order. Say, Hem zar'u v'atem lo, they sowed, you don't sow. They plowed, you shall not plow. They harvested, you should not harvest. And then jump to the end maybe and bring 2 more. But the way it is that he selected 3 melachot, 1, 3, and 39 is intriguing. So again, this is a proof that the list didn't exist. But not only that, I want to show you that the Katel of Hotza'ah wasn't the same as later sages understood that. So the last paragraph in the Mishnah is this: Ve'atem lo totziu mirshut hayachid lirshut hayachid. You cannot carry from the one private domain to another. The Gemara asks the question, obvious questions for us who know the halacha of today. Mirshut hayachid lirshut hayachid. My ka'avid. What, he takes something from one private domain to another? What has he done? There's no prohibition. There are different rabbis who interpret that. It means that he carries from the private domain to another private domain through the public domain. What is the very serious problem with that? That how can you, if you take from the private domain to the private domain through the public domain, then what you basically did, you just broke it into 2 actions. Why would you think that it would not be forbidden? If let's not use the term hotzah and achnasa, right? Taking out and bringing in. If taking out to the public domain is forbidden, and bringing into the private domain is forbidden, then this kind of otza'ah written here is basically both taking out and bringing in. Why would I think that it is less than taking in alone, taking out alone, and bringing in alone? Right? Doesn't make sense. So later on, it will have to be explained as something called zrika, throwing. You didn't really travel the distance in Reshut HaRabim, but rather there are 2 balconies that face each other, and you pass from each other through Reshut HaRabim without actually covering the distance in Reshut HaRabim, and that is also forbidden. The problem with that interpretation would be, let me show you one chapter in the Tosefta. Here, this is the corresponding discussion in the Tosefta. In the Mishnah, we read about shtei gezuztraot zo al gabei zo, 2 balconies, one on top of the other, and if you throw from one to another, that you're liable. But in the Mishnah, in the Tosefta, it's shtei sartaot instead of gezuztraot, balconies, sartaot, and in the correct version, it's strataot. So, and the commentators explain shtei strataot. There are 2 highways. That one is a little higher than the other, and one throws from one highway to another, sort of like part of the turnpike in New Jersey. You have that as a hill, and one level of the highway is lower than the other. So he throws from one place to another. It's a completely different story than throwing from one Reshut HaYachid to another through the public domain. But the Gemara had to do that to the. Let's go back to the text here in the the Bavli.
Before you go back,
yes.
I thought the source would be in Shemot with the story with the manna, where
right.
Hashem says don't go from one place to another on
Right.
Shabbat.
That would be so. That is that pasuk about the manna is used to speak about eruv tchumin, that you're not allowed to travel more than 2,000 feet outside the camp, and there's also a big discussion in Masechet Eruvin. But Rambam doesn't count it as a mitzvah, and it seems that when you look at the context in the Torah, it's only for the people in the desert. Because the only reason that you would have to go out is to gather the manna, but God says you're not going to have it on Shabbat, and going out will be an act of defiance, or almost like an act of heresy. So that's probably the reason there. So now we are talking about carrying, and that is a more problematic concept that people have to try to find the source for. So we'll move once again to the to page 96 a, which is chapter 11 of Masechet Shabbat, and that is the corresponding to the Tosefta that I just showed you about a zoek, about one who throws an object from one balcony to another, and say ketzad shte gezuz traot zo keneged zo b'shut harabim. See, they speak about two balconies, and then I showed you that in the Mishnah, in the Tosefta, it's not gezuz traot, it's not balconies, but rather strataot, that are two public domains. However, shte agalot zo אחר זו ברשות הרבים, מושיטין הקרשים מזו לזו, אבל לא זורקים. If there are two wagons, one after another in the public domain, the planks would be given to each other, but not thrown. Now, so if we understand that as referring to the Mishkan, the Mishnah doesn't say that it's in the Mishkan. Apparently, the way the Mishnah is phrased, it speaks just about someone who is on a wagon going through the public property on Shabbat, and the question is whether he's allowed to pass the planks or not. It says shekach hayta avodat halevim, but the Mishnah says this: shekach hayta avodat halevim. That was how the Levites worked in the Mishkan. They would hand the krashim to each other, and they would not throw them. And obviously, they would not be able to throw the boards because they were very, very heavy. They were big boards, big planks, heavy planks. They were not something that you could throw. But the question is different. It says this: Hamoshit hayav v'azorek patur. That if you pass from one, like we saw the interpretation of Ayev Rava in page 49, that if you move an object from one wagon to another wagon, you would be hayav. You would be liable, because this is what the Levites did in the tabernacle. So I just try to picture that. Why would this happen? I mean, in the construction or the taking apart and putting together of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan, why would this happen, that people would hand the beams over from one wagon to another? We think about the because we have to come up, if we really want to tie the works of Shabbat to something that happened in the Mishkan, we have to come up not with something that would happen haphazardly or randomly, but rather with something that happened on a regular basis, something that was required for the construction of the Mishkan. So now, the Gemara says that the way the Leviim traveled, they had the wagons following each other in the public domain, and now they are taking the planks from one wagon and move it to another. Why would that happen? Once they took apart the Mishkan and they put all the boards on the wagons, why would they move one of them to another wagon? It would never happen. Think of any movable structure that you know that is done by professional people, like the circus tent or anything like that. Everything is designated, it has its place, has its number, and the Mishnah, actually, the Gemara later on says that the Melakhot of Ktiva, of writing, is a Melakha that existed in the Mishkan because they would write on the planks the letters that they would tell them where to go, what number, what side of the Mishkan, etc. So they took apart the Mishkan, they put it on the wagons, and they start moving. Why would they move the planks from one wagon to another? So this is really...
The wagon was broken.
If the wagon was broken, it already becomes like the public property because it's a rare situation. But to add to that another element, where would they travel with the agalot? Where would they travel with the wagons? In the desert. They're not part of the camp. When they were parked, when they camped, the camp of the Israelites is defined by the Mishnah as Reshut HaRabim because it was surrounded. Let's say it was fenced off, even if not physically, just virtually. They knew the boundaries of the camp, and therefore it's Reshut HaRabim. But once they fold the camp and they start traveling as they are now with the wagons, the domain in which they travel is not considered public domain anymore. It's considered Carmelit because it's the desert, it's no man's land, and the camp doesn't exist there. They are traveling. So, but this is not the end of our problems with trying to figure out this melacha. So the Gemara asks the question: Mikdi zrika tolada de hotzai, hotza'a gufa hecha ketiva. So the Gemara says that throwing is just a derivative, a subcategory of hotza'ah, of taking out. Hotza'ah gufa hecha ketiva. Where is it written that one is not allowed to carry? And we already read the Baraita in page 46 and 49. Remember, it says Hem hotziu v'atem lo totziu. So what is the question? The question here is, we don't want an assumption based on how we see the work in the Mishkan. We want to find a specific verse, a pasuk that tells us that the Tosa'ah is forbidden. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar Kara, because it is written, Vayitzav Moshe v'yaviru kol b'machaneh. Moshe commanded the people he said what? It's not written here. It says, Ish v'isha al ya'asu od avodah limlechet HaKodesh. Neither man nor woman should make any more work for the offering for the sanctuary. And people obeyed him and they stopped bringing the materials. Now, what is the proof from that? It seems like the proof is that Moshe said, people, the artisans, the workers, came to Moshe and told him, Marbi ma'am le'avi migdei avodah la'melacha. We have too many donations, we cannot handle them. So Moshe made this proclamation, Al ta'asu od avodah, don't work anymore. So the craftsman said, don't bring any more stuff. And Moshe phrased it as, don't do any more work. So now you equate the two and you say, bringing the stuff, bringing the object to the place where the craftsmen work is in itself a type of work. But this is not what the Gemara says. Moshe, this is more the Malbim in his interpretation of the pasuk says, but not what the Gemara says here. The Gemara goes on to say, Moshe chana vayativ b'machane leviyah u'machane leviyah reshut harabim avai. Moshe lived in the camp of the Levites, which was reshut harabim, and he told the people, don't bring objects from your private domain to my area, which is public domain. This is tenuous, and I think that actually that specific phrase from Moshe to the end of the paragraph was added by the anonymous Savoraim or Stamaim, because it tries to pin that commandment of Moshe on Shabbat, as if it happened on Shabbat. And to say that Moshe told them, don't bring any more things because it's Shabbat and you cannot carry. But the Pasuk already told us clearly that the reason for that statement was that there were too many objects that were brought as an offering and they couldn't handle it. However, the other problem is, why do you consider the camp of the Levites Reshut HaRabim and not the camp of the Israelites? So, and if you say, no, we're talking about the tent, the personal tents, like Rashi says, that was the private domain, then Moshe also is in a tent. So they're also bringing to the private domain. So this is a very nebulous proof. The Gemara says, "Umimai dev Shabbat kae dilma bechol kae umishum dishlima la melacha." Why do you read this pasuk as speaking of Shabbat? Maybe it is just a regular day, and the reason that Moshe tells them not to bring the materials is because he had too much, just like the pasuk says. The Gemara says, "Gamar ha'avara miyom kippurim." We learn it by equating the text like a gzera shava to the text that of Yom Kippur. K'tiv acha va'yaviru kol b'machaneh. Here it says that they passed the note, the sound, the word about the request of Moshe in the camp. Uchtivatam ve'avarta shofar teruah. You pass a shofar on the Yom Kippur of the year of the Jubilee. Ma lehalan b'yom isur, afkan b'yom isur. Just as in the discussion of Yom Kippur, the word leha'avir is mentioned in the context of a forbidden day, here also it is mentioned in the context of a forbidden day. This is completely baseless. This kind of proof, there's no Gzera Shava. This is definitely a later addition. I would stick to the just statement of Rabbi Yochanan. I believe that was the original text of the Gemara. Just Rabbi Yochanan says this, because it says that Moshe told people not to do any more work for the Mishkan, and the work is understood as only referring to the act of bringing the material. However, this is in itself not sufficient, because people did work at home. They were preparing wool and fabrics and other things, and they would bring the final product. So when Moshe says, don't do any more work for the offering, he's not talking about the work of carrying the materials to his tent, but rather of the work performed in people's tents, transforming raw material into finished products. So that proof is, even though it's mentioned in the Gemara, logically could be easily rejected. So the Gemara goes on to say, Ashkehan otza'ah, hachnasa minalan. So we found that the melacha of otza'ah, of taking out from the private domain to the public domain, is forbidden. Hachnasa minalan, where from do I learn that you cannot carry from the private domain, from the public domain into the private domain? Svarai, that's a logical assumption. Mikdei mereshut lereshut, who, since the whole prohibition is about moving stuff or objects from one property to another, mali apuke u mali ayule. What do I care if it's bringing in or taking out? And like I mentioned before, there is a huge difference, and we don't usually say, oh, since it's already forbidden, what do I care if it's this way or that way? This is contrary to the way the Gemara always tries to milk out all the differences between different actions. Like I mentioned, for example, in Melakhot borer, that the Mishnah says, borer ve'ochel, borer u'maniach. One can eat, and one can filter food from non-food and eat right away, or put aside. And then the Gemara goes on to analyze what is exactly putting aside. And then it says, if he puts aside with the intention of not eating it immediately, even if he wants to eat it later, it's forbidden. So we see that the Gemara goes for such fine distinctions in the thought process of what exactly the person is going to do with it. So how can you say that it doesn't matter where he wants to bring it in or wants to bring it out? There's a huge difference. So the Gemara answers that, however, that Hachnasa is a logical inference from Hotza'ah, from taking out. Miu Hotza'ah av Achnasa Tolada. However, Hotza'ah, taking out, is a master category or a parent category, and Achnasa is Tolada, it's a descendant category. So now the Gemara asks, Umikdi ahami hayev ve'ami hayev. Since one is liable for both of them, amai karei lahai av ve'amai karei lahai tolada. What does it matter if one is called av, parent, and another one is called descendant? The Gemara answers, nafkamina the avit shtei avot ba'adei adadei, that if one by mistake did perform two categories at once, or two subcategories at once, and they belong to different categories, he will be liable for each one of them. But if he did a parent and its descendant, he's only liable for one. That didn't answer the question. The question was, why is Achnasa Av, and why is Hotza'ah Av, taking out, is a master category, and bringing in a descendant category? The Gemara didn't answer that. The Gemara sort of like bypassed it by saying, "Oh, the difference between master and descendant category is the liability." But we put this aside, and we just, as I said, we're going through all the problematic points in the discussion of the Gemara. ולרבי אליעזר דמחייב התולדה במקום אב, עמי קראו לאב ועמי קראו לתולדה. So now they go and ask about Rabbi Eliezer. And this is a general question, not just about Achnasa and Hotza'ah, but about all the Melakhot. That if you realize, I don't know if we spoke about that, the concept of Toladot is not mentioned in the Mishnah. It's discussed over and over and over again in the commentaries and in the Talmud, but never mentioned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah only speaks about Avot and not about Toladot. It's just a sort of a natural assumption that if you have avot, if you have parents, you have descendants. But the Mishnah never mentions that. And there is a good reason why the Mishnah doesn't mention that, because there was no clear distinction between the two. And hopefully when we go later on into the commentaries of Rambam and others on Tolada and Av, we'll see how difficult it is to determine whether something is an Av or a Tolada. And it's sometimes... So I'm going to repeat the question. So you're asking about the Baraita in 49b, and whether we should assume that the Zorea, and so the three types of Hotza'ah, from Reshut HaRabim to Reshut HaYahid and vice versa, and from Reshut HaYahid to Reshut HaYahid, are all considered Avot in there. And the answer is yes. In that Mishnah, that Baraita is obviously an earlier Tanaitic source. That's why we're using that. Remember that all our previous discussion when we went through the introduction to oral law, to the formation of the Mishnah and the Gemara, we spoke about layers. This is clearly a Mishnah from an earlier layer, where they still considered each one of them as a separate melacha that one is hayav for. Now, who is the representative of that line of thought? It's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is the one called Rabbi Eliezer HaShamuti, the one who is called Shamuti either because he's from Bet Shammai or because he was Meshumat. They put him in excommunication. Bet Shammai are the Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanos. Bet Shammai represented the ancient halacha, and Bet Hillel were the reformers. That is, I think I mentioned that. If not, look at there's a book about Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrkanos by my professor in Bar Ilan, Professor Gilat, Yitzhak Gilat. He went through all the discussions in the Mishnah and the Tosefta and the Talmud where Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrkanos is mentioned, and he shows how in each and every one of them he represents the ancient halacha that was at times more subjective, and at times more. It's not about being strict or lenient, but rather it's more about subjectivity, meaning that there are no general rules set for times and measures and all that, but rather each thing is determined by its personal characteristics. So, for example, there is no age for mitzvot, but rather when a person is ready to perform a certain mitzvah, is obligated, and if he didn't do it, he's punishable, and so on. So Rabbi Eliezer was the carrier of the flame, and that's why he was eventually excommunicated, because he insisted, he was anti the reform movement. That the Bet Hillel and their agenda was a reform movement, and Bet Shammai didn't accept it. Now, Rabbi Eliezer, what is his take on the Melakhot? Rabbi Eliezer mehayev atolada bimkom av. Rabbi Eliezer makes one liable for the performance of a subcategory as well as the category itself. So for him, even if it's the same melacha and its descendant category, there will be two prohibitions. So it's not the mehayev atolada bimkom av. That's how the Gemara reads it, that he makes you liable for the subcategory even when you perform the category with it. No, what Rabbi Eliezer says is there's no such thing as subcategories. Each forbidden act is in itself a category, and you don't make any distinctions. So, but they insist on that distinction, and he says, "Amai karu la'av, amai karu la'tolada." So, why is one called av and one is called tolada? They say if one, if that specific work existed in the tabernacle, it's called av, and if not, it's called tolada. So that again raises the whole question about the actual 39 melachot that were not in the Mishkan, but similar things were in the Mishkan. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, they should not be called melacha. Anyway, let's conclude today's discussion with the end of this baraita. Now, the Mishnah wants to know, where did we get the halacha from that if you throw an object in the public property, in the public domain, meaning that you threw it and it landed on the ground, it's like carrying. So that you play frisbee, but they speak actually about playing ball. They did that. The people who play ball in Reshut HaRabim, they kicked the ball and it went 4 feet and landed. They say that's like carrying. Where do you take it from? So look at this very interesting argument that this is what was done in the temple. Sheken orgei ri'ot zorkin mechatehen ze lazeh, because the weavers would throw the needles to each other. So, right, can you imagine that? That is how throwing was performed in the construction of the tabernacle, because the weavers were sit by each other, and one of them says, "Hey, pass me the needle," and you just throw it at him, right? Even though those are big needles, but still, it's hard to imagine that would be done, right? So very strange. So the Gemara challenges that. Orgin mehatin lamalu. Weavers don't use needles. Ela sheken tofrei ri'ot zorkin mehatin ze lazeh. No, those who sewed the tapestries together, right? Like the tailors, they throw the needles. The Gemara says, "V'dilma gabei adadei avuyad." How do you know that they sit far from each other? Because you assume that they're sitting 4 feet from each other, right? And they have to throw the needles to each other. So the Gemara answers, "Matu hadadei b'mehati." No, they couldn't be sitting next to each other because they would hurt each other when they move the needle. The Gemara says, "Dilma betoch arba avuyad." So still, they sat far from each other, but within 4 feet. I mean, you realize this whole discussion goes nowhere. I don't know if you see how strange, or even, I don't say other words, surprising it is. We're trying to define a certain melacha, to say that it's forbidden, and we try to find a scenario where the weavers are sitting next to each other and throw needles at each other. This is really the source for the melacha? It's impossible. And the Gemara keeps rejecting it. It says they could have been sitting within 4 feet to each other. El Amar Rav Hizda, sheken oreg yiri'ot zorkin buchyar ba'yiri'ah. It's because the weavers have a shuttle. The shuttle is used to warp the wool around the loom, and they through the loom, and they throw it on one hand to another. If you ever saw a loom, that it's really you throw the shuttle, it keeps traveling to the end of the yiri'ah. So the Gemara says va'alo ogdo be'ado, but it's still connected to it's still holding the thread, the weaver. So the Gemara says benischa batra. No, with the last thread, he releases it. Ve'abimkom ptur ka'azla, but this goes to it's on the yiri'ah. It's not reshut harabim. Remember, this whole thing we're trying to figure out when in the construction of the Mishkan, people would throw objects from one to another over the space of 4 feet in the public domain. And now the Gemara says, but if you're saying that it's about throwing the shuttle over the loom is a separated property from the public domain. So the Gemara answers, Ela sheken orgei yiri'ot zorkin buchyar lesho'alehen. Because the weavers throw the shuttle to each other. That goes back to the beginning, the statement in the beginning of throwing the needles. Again, they ask, maybe the weavers were sitting together. No, they would touch each other. The Gemara says, maybe the looms were set up intermittently, so they're not 4 feet away from each other, but one is a little bit to the back, one to the front, and so back and forth they have enough room. And also, how can you say that they borrowed tools from each other? They bring a proof that from the text that did not happen, that each one has his tools. They say finally, before you ask about throwing, how do you even know that carrying 4 feet in the public domain is forbidden? But we must say that moving an object in the public domain, whether it's by carrying or by throwing, is just tradition. And that is amazing that after the Gemara went into such length trying to prove it from the text, trying to prove it from a certain work that was performed in the Mishkan, it comes to the conclusion that it's tradition. It's just oral tradition. But if it was oral tradition, they should have known better. They should have said it from the beginning. The way it is phrased here, it says since we were not able to find any proof in the text, and since we were not able to equate it with any melacha that is mentioned in the Mishkan, we must assume that it's tradition. All that brings us to the conclusion that the melacha of hotza'ah was not really a melacha that was understood in ancient times as a work. It was something that was instituted by the rabbis, and for that reason. And I spoke about it in one of the recorded classes a couple of days ago on chapter 1 on Shabbat, under halachic methodology. I discussed that, and so you see that later rabbis were trying to limit the scope of the prohibition. Resh Lakish specifically, the first generation of Amoraim, says that there is no public domain in this world until Mashiach comes, because the whole world has to be flat. Basically, what happened was that the rabbis instituted the melacha of hotza'ah as a measure to prevent people from conducting commercial business on Shabbat. Once it took on, it was too difficult to keep with. But if you look at as I said before, the volume of Mishnaic literature dedicated to hotza'ah, you realize that it is really something that the rabbis created, and that's why they wrote so much about it. You have out of 9,700 words in the Mishnah, Shabbat and Eruvin, almost 6,000 are dedicated to carrying. So with that, we'll conclude today. We have several more sugyot in the Bavli that speak about the association of the Melakhot that we have to do in depth, and that will be in Perek Shevi'i. So if you have time and you want to go over the Gemara Talmud Yerushalmi on chapter 7 Mishnah Bet, that will be where you prepare for the next Shiur Be'ezrat Hashem. If you have time to go over the Gemara before next week, it's good to start in page 70a. In that paragraph that says Hayav al kol melacha melacha hiluk melachot min alan. What the Gemara asks, from where do we derive the division of labors? Meaning, how do we even know that if one performed two separate works on Shabbat, he's liable for each one of them? That is the question that the Gemara asks. So, and then it goes on to speak about Hav'ara and how we have one melacha that teaches about others, that you are liable for all. And from there we'll take it on. Maybe we'll skip one page and go to the actual Melakhot. Okay. So, thank you all for participating today. Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll meet again next week at the same time.